What does it really mean to be cool? I mean, obviously it's a word that we use all the time, but as a concept, it's kind of loaded. I had a friend visiting from Montreal recently, and we went to this pub to do my two favorite things, talk about the internet and split the G. We started talking about social media and performing online and this sort of game of trying to be ahead of the curve all the time. We joked about wanting to be the cool person with cool interests who posts cool things and gets invited to cool events. Point was, cool is this metric that a lot of us use to dictate our actions. I think it's something that we're all at least acutely aware of. Like, look at the way we can't stop talking about being performative and is it embarrassing to be in a relationship. We know that cool has this cultural cachet, but why? You know, like, where did cool come from and how did it change over the years, especially with the internet? Before we get into it though, I want to share what this video isn't. It's not me gatekeeping cool. It's not me trying to assert my coolness, because God knows I'm not. And it's not me claiming authority over any of this information. It's really just me sharing my learnings on the history of cool and how the function of cool has changed with the internet. So, let's do this. If we want to know the history of cool, we have to go back to roughly the 1930s. And this will be a very brief history. I'll do my best to share what I can in a concise way, but know that there are people much more qualified than me who have written extensively about this, so I'll share some as we go and put more in the description. This article, How Did Cool Become Such a Big Deal in Humanities, does a good job at tracing its history. They described an early use of cool in Zora Neale Hurston's Mules and Men, a collection of Black America folklore. Here he's describing his guitar, and cool is used as a descriptor of something that sort of defines his autonomy, giving him a sense of rhythm and control. But it was really with jazz circles in the 40s and 50s that cool kind of takes shape as what we know it today. Lester Young, a tenor saxophonist known as Prez in jazz circles, was a key figure in defining the style and demeanor associated with cool. His playing was smooth and effortless, which was in contrast to the more energetic styles of jazz at the time. This extended beyond music to his image. He dressed sharply and spoke in a relaxed tone. It kind of became the model for jazz cool. Now, slang was a big part of jazz. In 1938, the jazz singer Cab Calloway published the Hipster's Dictionary, which was a pamphlet that explained jive talk. Spoiler alert, hipster later evolved into hipster. Jazz had a huge impact on American slang today. The cool school, writing from America's hip underground, contains a bunch of memoirs from the, quote, original hipsters, and a big part of jazz was about embodying Black culture and expressing that through art. James Gore argued that jazz gave African American artists a platform to communicate their worldviews. And when it became really popular in white-dominated spaces, coolness was this set of behaviors that were tools for navigating these oppressive contexts. In A Sociology of the Absurd, Lyman and Scott also describe coolness as poise under pressure. They said coolness then refers to the capacity to execute physical acts, including conversation, in a concerted, smooth, self-controlled fashion in risky situations, or to maintain affective detachment during the course of encounters involving considerable emotion. By the mid-century point, cool was becoming cool. Miles Davis recorded Birth of the Cool. All this to say the concept of coolness has a really rich history in Black culture that we've only scratched the surface of, and it became popular in America by the mid-20th century, largely thanks to jazz.
You like jazz?
By the time we get into the 50s, cool is everywhere. In Cool Rules, The Anatomy of an Attitude, Pontaine and Robbins do a great job at tracing how it was sort of appropriated to the broader culture. It started with the Beat Generation, which was this post-war subculture all about rejecting the conservative mainstream American values. Jack Kerouac, one of the original Beats, wrote an article for the New York Times where he said it involves a sort of nakedness of mind and ultimately of soul, a feeling of being reduced to the bedrock of consciousness. To the Beats, it was about living fast and dying young by displaying this cool attitude of nonchalance and resistance. And this image of the rebel really catches on as the symbol of the post-war weariness that a lot of people were feeling. We started to see the classic Hollywood cool guys like James Dean in Rebel with the Cause or Marlon Brando in The Wild One. The counterculture movement of the 60s also became a symbol of cool. We get the word hippie from hipster. Same sense of nonchalance and nonconformity, just in different clothes and music and drugs. Interestingly though, we also see this addition of cool being about social change. Square society was unjust and in need of reform. Then all the way through the 70s and 80s, cool just kept popping up in different countercultures. It was a set of traits to show individualism against what was expected by the mainstream. Classic symbols of cool: Bob Dylan, Nina Simone, John Lennon, Angela Davis, Patti Smith, just to name a few. In the UK, punk was a big moment for cool because it sort of created a template for youth to work from. Invent a distinctive haircut and clothes, find a new drug and a new music, or maybe resurrect an old music, and you have a new movement. This formula has repeated itself from the 80s 80s to today, from glam rock and the new romantics through grunge to hip hop, acid house, techno, and trance. I'm fast tracking a lot of this, but I really do recommend reading Cool Rules if you're curious to get more of a breakdown of the different eras. But, you can see how cool became this lifestyle of rebellion or individualism. This would often come with cultural capital. To be cool was to be a part of an in-group. Andy Warhol really capitalized on that cool detachment. Being a part of his factory meant being so uninterested in a chic way. Minimalist artists like Donald Judd and Agnes Martin really pushed the idea of emotional restraint in their work. We started to see more conceptual art from people like Joseph Kossuth and An Kawara. Here, being cool was about how much you got it. If you know, you know. Obviously, a big part of this was elitism, meaning that if you didn't get it, you were not a part of the in-group and you weren't cool. I don't know if you've ever seen 101 Dalmatians 2, but there's this French artist in the movie, Lars, who's obsessed with spots, and I think he's just kind of the perfect depiction of the pretentious artist of this time. Then as we get later into the 20th century, it's cool to be cool, and because it's cool, it's monetizable. So we get something called cool capitalism. This is a term coined by Jim McGeegan, a professor of cultural analysis. The idea here is that disaffection and rebellion of coolness kind of become absorbed by corporations and sold back to us. So think of Nike's campaign Just Do It or Apple's Think Different. The classic characteristics of cool and going against the mainstream kind of become these consumable symbols of individuality. And I kind of think cool can only really exist in the context of capitalism, at least in a traditional sense. Cool requires a mainstream to be compared against, but the mainstream is a byproduct of market logic. For something to be mainstream, there has to be some sort of system of mass audiences and distribution pipelines. Like obviously you can have norms in any culture, but that's a little bit more about social cohesion than market dominance. But that's neither here nor there. As we get into the 2000s, cool takes on different meanings in different contexts. It becomes common to describe objects we like as cool, like, oh, that painting is so cool, that book was so cool. Here, I think we start to see cool used synonymously with interesting. But of course, the image of a cool person persisted in the media. It's a bit of a deep cut, but I watched the show The Weekenders after school every day, and it was about how 14s in Southern California spent their weekends. There were these two other kids, Bree and Colby, yes, like the cheese, who were known as the cool kids. They wore baggy clothes and mumbled their words. The Weekenders wiki describes them as often shown to enjoy hanging out, which consists of standing around and leaning on surfaces such as walls. There's an episode, Uncool World, where Bree and Colby have a cool showdown to decide which one of them was cooler.
Colby makes the first move. A perfectly executed who cares shrug. Bree counters with a classic I'm so bored slouch. Ooh, a devastatingly cool pair of shades. That has got to hurt.
Bree lost because she was a fan of Little Muffins and was forced to spend her weekend with the uncool kids. They rode bikes, went to the arcade, had a heartfelt moment of gratitude, and Bree learned the lesson that mocking people was wrong. Eventually, she becomes cool again and stops being able to see the uncool kids. I mean that literally, like she loses the ability to see them.
See something?
Just some uncool blurs.
You totally should have seen that coming.
Lots of classic depictions of the cool kids, but ironically, we started to use cool to describe things in the mainstream. Remember that song Cool Kids by Echo Smith that was all over Vine back in the day? They sang, I wish that I could be like the cool kids because all the cool kids, they seem to fit in. That's a big shift from cool being about not fitting in, going against the mainstream. The song also became a bit of an anthem for 2010's cool, which was about Tumblr and indie music and being in on internet culture. Anyway, lots of different eras of cool, but you can see the themes of resisting the mainstream, being a part of a subculture, and to some extent having taste. So there's this essay, Manhattan Syndrome, by Sean Tatel in the Manhattan Art Review. In it, he talks about the state of art in New York. He describes a crisis of cool. He explains how art has always been cool by the way that it represents its era, its relevance and novelty as sense phenomena and feeling, allowing the viewer to experience that era in a new light. Think about Duchamp's famous urinal, which was a literal urinal that was recontextualized as an art piece. It's not impressive on its own, it's literally a urinal, but it broke the rules of art at the time and sparked conversation. It was cool. Then he goes on to talk about the expectation that still exists for artists to represent their time, but the issue being that novelty doesn't really exist anymore. He says artists grope for a new lightning bolt of an idea like a urinal or a flag, but those shocks of the new are a thing of the past. Nothing can be particularly surprising when everyone is addicted to Instagram. He goes further to say that any attempts to be subversive or resistant are ironically kind of expected. What in 2024 could be more expected than a shallow attempt to restart the avant-garde? Granted, I think this is a bit cynical. Like, I'm I'm not entirely convinced that nothing can be new. I just think the function of novelty has changed. Maybe it's less about the object having shock value and never been done before, but it's exploring new relationships and asking new questions in its processes or system. Plus, I don't think we're really doing ourselves a service by preserving cool art as something only insiders could make, but he does get at something really interesting he calls art cool reflexivity. He defines this as a preoccupation with the means of coolness as the thing to be attained, mistaking the attainment of cool as the object of desire rather than the vehicle for exploration. In other words, as this idea of novelty changes, artists become a bit more reflexive and self-aware of how cool operates as a social system. So the work ends up being a bit derivative, as in art about being a cool artist in New York for other cool artists in New York, referencing the coolness of being an artist in New York. And this idea of art cool reflexivity really stood out to me as something that kind of extends beyond the art scene, that being cool as an object of desire and the ways that we see ourselves from the outside. Chris Marino's essay, The Death of the Cool, actually speaks to this. He talks about the play Dime Square as an exploration of the inner workings of artists and writers in the downtown scene trying to keep up with cool. The audience gets a glimpse into the apartment of this group of artists and their conversations about nightlife and careers and relationships and art. But the art isn't really seen or discussed at all. It's just the backdrop of their lives as up-and-coming cool artists. They're performative, they're messy, they're honest, and I really do want to see it. Marino's point here was that this idea of art cool reflexivity is not exclusive to the capital A art world, but can be seen in our culture more broadly. He argues that because of digital technology, we have this new worker class of the freelancer entrepreneur, and it's the main way creative people survive today, constantly being proactive to new opportunities, developing new relationships, and always being visible. And this is where you get that reflexivity, because once you're aware you're in this visibility market, you can't unknow it. So we get this interesting tension where coolness can't really be about detachment or not caring when you're expected to care and anticipate interpretation. But I want to step back and talk a bit more about this visibility market. How has the internet changed cool? You might already be familiar with the famous theory of Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. In a nutshell, his point was that the media we communicate with are not passive. They shape what we say, how we say it, and how we perceive it. So with art cool reflexivity, it's not that we all just grew a third eye and became self-aware. It was facilitated by the platforms that are built into our lives. I don't need to tell you how dominant social media websites have become, but a few things come along with that. A constant audience, either a real or perceived one, metrics like views, likes, followers, even if you don't care about them, you notice them, and the big one, recommendation algorithms. The algorithm has become this invisible, omnipresent agent that governs our lives. Even the way we describe it as the algorithm, like it's this mystical being. We don't know exactly how they work, but we know that they recommend content that they think we'll like. To do this, it has to categorize the content, sort it in a patterned way. And when everything is sortable, everything becomes legible. Anything that might be underground or niche or countercultural is subject to being a pattern. Patterns become recommendations become visible, and once something is visible, it's no longer scarce. And that, I think, is a huge shift for coolness. Scarcity used to be the fuel. Cool was about being in the know. But online, nothing stays small. The algorithm's job is literally to find things you don't know about yet and show it to everyone very quickly. And if the medium is the message, then this awareness shapes how we present ourselves. We start to anticipate the ways that will be categorized or sorted, which creates this strange double awareness where we're not just expressing ourselves, but we're expressing ourselves in a way that's legible. Marino says the cool as a cultural logic does not really coexist with digital technology, for it emerges out of a dialectic of privacy and social immersion largely incompatible with digital experience. The cool is the product of neither the isolated individual nor social convention, but of the dynamic movement between these two poles. The digital, however, disrupts this dialect of self and society by weakening each of these poles and offering instead an experience suspended hazily between them. So what we get is this collapse of context and what Marino describes as the death of the cool. Here, I think it's important to clarify that it's not a matter of arguing that everything is lame now. I'm really not a big fan of this growing sentiment that algorithms are destroying culture. If you haven't seen it, PageMelt has a really great video essay, Be Your Own Algorithm, where they talk about this exact topic in the context of Kyle Chayka's book, Filter World. Their main counterargument here being that creativity is alive and well, despite the issues of the algorithm, and I agree. There may be a lot of noise, but that doesn't diminish the really interesting work that still exists when you look for it. So it's not that everything is lame now, but the conditions for cool just don't exist in the same way. Now, meaning can change, right? Even in this video, we've talked about all the ways that cool has changed from survival to counterculture to commodity to aesthetic. I think we're just at another point where the meaning of cool is being renegotiated. Take a look at all the discourse today about authenticity and performative males, and is it embarrassing to be in a relationship now? We're so self-aware and we monitor each other for the same thing, except the medium is still the message, and the message is that we're all performing all the time, just by the awareness of visibility or the possibility of it. I think this means that cool today isn't directly about style or counterculture because these change so quickly. Instead, it's about how we navigate visibility, how we signal authenticity while knowing we're being watched, all while doing that in a way that people online can still recognize. The result is that cool has become a bit more about subtlety or irony. Mickey Galvin made a great video essay recently on the myth of the cool girl. She talked about the desire to have a cohesive self-identity where every aspect of your digital presence comes together to form a package. She talks about how consumerism is baked into coolness, how the cool girl is subtly fashionable, and how it intersects with race, looks, and of course gender. I think one of the big pieces she alludes to is the exhaustion that comes along with maintaining this image. Again, here we can see cool as this object of desire, but it's like a moving target where its meaning is just constantly being renegotiated. I want to point out that performativity isn't new, right? Like cool has always been inherently performative. What is new is the constant visibility and feedback loops that we get from digital platforms. So the mechanisms and scale have shifted and context has kind of been lost. In this article, Is Coolness Still Cool?, Vanessa Brown does a really good job at highlighting some of the troubles of cool today. We talked about a few of them, how cool is used to describe objects, the reflexivity and self-awareness. She also gets at the moral contradictions of cool, pro-social cool, and some other really cool ideas I'd recommend checking out. Cool is really tricky today because it's kind of about being niche and mainstream at the same time. I was thinking about normcore as this return to real clothes and the rejection of needing to look cool. The irony being it gets labeled as a core, becomes an aesthetic, and goes mainstream. Or Brat by Charlie XCX, which played with these tensions of being an it girl, being aware of the performance and the contradictions, and then that gets mass attention, Brat Girl Summer becomes a thing, brands get a hold of it, and suddenly it's everywhere. I personally really like both of these things. I might go so far as to say they're really cool, but you can see the way that everything that goes against the grain eventually gets funneled right back in. I made a video for It's Nice That where I talk about anti-aesthetics and how this eventually became its own form of curation. Again, trend cycles aren't new, but it's the mechanism and scale that have really changed the game. I think a new wave of cool we're going to see more of is being offline, or at least being online in such an obscure way that the algorithm can't really decode it. This Substack essay, The New Cool is Not Needing to Be Seen, dives into this. The main argument here is that we're not built for social media, and being offline allows us to stop performing. I see this argument a lot, that social media is the problem and everything would be okay without it, but I think this is a little bit of an oversimplification. On the one hand, performance is not inherent to social media, and the internet dictates a lot of our physical world, so this doesn't really eliminate the performance at all. The other thing is that social media websites have kind of become our digital public spaces. I definitely think there's something to be said about bettering our digital public spaces, making them safer, and maybe migrating to new ones eventually, but the growing sentiment of just ditching them doesn't really address the underlying issues. I'm not saying social media is for everyone. I'm also not saying that we need to accept the issues. I just think that it's a bit more of a conversation. You know that tweet that's like, people be saying things so definitively, like, I don't know, man, it depends. When did I start sitting like this? Being completely offline is also not an option for everyone. It's usually framed as this moral stance that we can transcend the algorithm and be happy by deleting everything. But a lot of people rely on social media for their careers, for access to information and community, for organizing movements and being heard. It reminds me of a point brought up in the Manhattan Syndrome article about the crisis of cool. He says the classic New York City art career formula is to cut your teeth in the scene and skip town as soon as you make it, because once you've made it, you're no longer dominated by anxiety about what it is you do. In other words, once you've built enough reputation or status or comfort, you've earned the luxury of disappearing. When we've built so many systems around visibility, it's not as simple as saying, well, let's just stop being visible. But just like quiet luxury, I think we'll see more of the offline being used as a symbol of cool. I think pointing out these contradictions can feel anxiety-inducing, like there's nothing we can do. That's not the message I want to give. The reason I wanted to make this video and explore coolness is I've also been trying to figure out how to navigate the performance and and feel good about it all. And I think where I'm coming to is trying to figure out how to de-center coolness. Like, if cool is just going to be this contradictory thing that's always out of reach, then what does it look like to disregard it? And honestly, I don't really have the answer for how to do that. One thing I do think is important is distinguishing authenticity from sincerity. Authenticity is the new buzzword, right? Being authentic is the new cultural capital, and we talked about how it's kind of in the same trap of cool. Sincerity I see as a bit more inward facing, like acknowledging the performativity and contradictions and focusing on what feels meaningful and cool to you. Obviously, easier said than done. I don't know if there's really an out. I think it's just learning different ways to reconcile with it and adapt. If I land on a solution, you guys will be the first to know. So ending on a bit of an open note, I'm curious to hear your reflections on cool and how you're navigating it. Maybe you have the solution to save us from cool. I would love that. But either way, I hope this video has at least given you a bit of vocabulary for how to dissect our relationship with cool. Whether or not you agree with me on any of this, I think being aware of how we participate in social systems at least makes me feel less anxious and more in control of how I engage with them. And that, my friends, is pretty cool. Ba-dum-ts.